Well, my name's Joe Bazeley, and I've been a member of this parish since before the Second World War. I have the magazine from April 1939, which has the notice of my baptism in it, and I've been a Standish resident ever since then.
Welcome to St Wilfrid's Church. On this site, a church has been in existence since the early 13th century. The church that we know so well today, St Wilfrid's Church, is a church built in the Elizabethan period. This church has been a place of prayer, a place of pilgrimage over the centuries since it was first built. Today, commonly a place where people come and pray and offer their prayers on a daily basis, or a place where we come to gather for worship Sunday by Sunday. But it's also a place where people come to be married, to have their children baptised. Indeed, at the end of their life, to give thanks for a family member's life as their funeral takes place. But as it does, it lies at the very heart of our village. And in this village, which over the years has broadened out to become almost like a small town, it still remains at the very centre of this village life. It's a remarkable place to minister to, and it's a remarkable place to be a part of. Welcome. I hope that you will enjoy this time as you watch this film about a remarkable place with much history, and through its history speaks to us here today on a daily basis. I would just simply wish to say, enjoy.
Right, welcome to St Wilfrid's Church in Standish. It's the only Grade 1 listed building in the whole of the Wigan Metropolitan Borough area. And we'll find out why once we get inside. But I think we ought to look at the building and see exactly how it's been built and the 4 different stages in it. If we have a look at the main part of the building, leave out for the moment the steeple, that is the square tower and the octagonal spire, and leave out the lower part of the building at the east end. That's the new vestries. And what you've got in between, that is the porch and the nave and the chancel. That's the oldest part of the building as it stands today. And that is from the 1580s. It is, in fact, a rebuild of a previous church. There were 2 previous churches on this site, and the one built in the 1300s was in 1543, reckoned to be in great ruin and decay. And so, in the later part of the 1500s, it was rebuilt on exactly the same site and exactly the same size, apart from 1 yard on the north side. It was rebuilt between 1582 and 1589. We say 1584 because there are stones inside with that date on. Now, if you look at this main part of the building, it is Gothic, late Gothic, English perpendicular. You can see the arches, the pointed arches, and the battlements going around the top, and the full-height mullions in the windows. and it's the earliest part of the building as we can now see it. And then when they were rebuilding, what they did not have to do was to take down the steeple, because that was perfectly good from the 1300s. Actually, what happened was that in 1814, the original spire was struck by lightning and badly damaged. And in 1822, there was an awful storm and the thing collapsed altogether. So they decided to put a new spire on the top of the square tower that there was. And they built the new spire in 1827, but people didn't like it over the next decades. It wasn't very well built at all. It wasn't in keeping with this 1580s church. And so in 1867, they decided to start again. So they took down not only the awful spire, but also the original 1300s tower, the square tower. And what you've got there today is 1870, the square tower and the octagonal spire, the whole steeple is new. That is 1870. Though, as you can see, it's in keeping with the architecture. You've still got the arched windows and the buttresses keeping the walls up, and it's slightly better dressed stone, as you'd imagine, but it is in keeping with the church. The church in the 1580s was built of millstone grit. Apart from a few parts of it, a few stones which were able to be reused from the previous one. You can see round the porch there are some sandstone parts, and round the there. But in the chancel, the whole, more or less the whole of the bottom half of the side walls in the sanctuary are sandstone, and they are from the previous church. You've got in the tower, you've got the clock. I'm sorry that the clock is actually stopped, but it's because of some work that is going to have to be done inside. But there are three faces to the clock, aren't there? There's the face you can see, which is pointing south towards Wigan, and there's the one on the other side pointing north towards Preston, and there's one on the west side pointing towards Southport, shall we say. None at all on the east side, just as there wasn't on the previous spire dating back into the 1300s, because, as we know, there's nobody who lives down Rectory Lane, no houses there, nobody to see it, apart from, I think, very recently there have been a whole cluster of new estates built down there, but that's only in the last 10 years or so. Now, the third part, that was the second, the third part is the vestries, which are low height, but built in exactly the same style, but they date from 1913. They are a memorial to the rector's wife, Annie Rose Hutton. And they are in keeping with the church as it stands. Now, the last part is the Peace Gate. And again, it's in keeping, but it's built in 1926. It's called the Peace Gate because it is a memorial to the peace of the end of the First World War in 1918, and the names of the fallen from Standish in that war are inside, and also have been added the names of the fallen from the Second World War in 1939 to 45. The outside gates, by the way, are original, but the inside ones are replicas just from 1998. Now, can you see the sculpture? That is our patron saint, St Wilfrid. And you can see round it, you can see it says Sanctus Wilfridius Episcopus and his dates, 634 to 709. And it's a fine sculpture with St Wilfrid holding a copy of the church. We hadn't got at the time, when it was being sculpted, an original photograph of St Wilfrid. So the sculptor had to use the face of somebody important, and he chose the bishop. The bishop of the time of the diocese we were in, the Bishop of Manchester. And you may have heard of him, William Temple. He went on to be Archbishop in 1927 of York, and then in the war years, 1942 to 44, he was Archbishop of Canterbury, and did very good work during the war. But we have his face here as the face of St Wilfrid. Did I say we were in the Diocese of Manchester? Oh yeah, well, it's just 6 months after that was built that the Diocese of Blackburn was established, the northern half of Manchester and the southern part of Carlisle, round Lancaster and round there. And so we're in a new diocese, and we are now in the Diocese of Blackburn. Before that, we were in Manchester, weren't we? Well, Manchester was only established in 1847, and before that, we were in Chester. Chester dates right back to 1541. Before that, we were in Lichfield. And if the church had been here before 926, which we don't know about, we'd have been in York. So Standish has travelled about quite a lot. That's the story of the 4 parts of this building. Wilfrid, by the way, was a Northumbrian, wasn't he? An Anglian, not a Saxon. He was brought up on Holy Island, that's Lindisfarne, in the 600s. He was responsible for the changeover in 664 of the Synod of Whitby, when there was a dispute between the Celtic Church and the Roman Church, and he came down on the Roman side, which was about really the date of Easter and the shape of monks' tonsures. But he came down on that side, and so we were part of the Roman Church from then onwards. Can we just have a little look at these 2 artifacts, if you like? We have a stone tomb there, a sarcophagus, and we think that it belonged to the architect of the original church of the 1300s, because it was found in the old tower that was only taken down in 1867. And you can see that it would have been, he would have been buried upright, as was the normal case in those days. He would have had the right to be in his tower, and he was buried upright. So you can see the little stone there, the little hole where the juices would have been allowed to flow out. And the pebble that we're looking at as well is glacial. It's come down with the ending of the last ice age. That's in 10,000 BC. We have a geologist in the village who has reckoned that that stone is Irish, because it's like some stone that is still there in Ireland. And it has come down from Iceland and then Ireland and then into this part of the country with the glaciers. It was found in 1896 in the churchyard as the churchyard was being extended. It was only sort of 18 inches below the surface, which is no good for when you come to dig graves. So the sexton got it out and brought it here. And so there's the commentary on that action actually etched into the stone. Can I just look at 3 stones that you can just about pick out on the churchyard wall? The one on the black stones there, the one on the right is the bottom half of the coat of arms of the Standish family, and it's come out of the old tower, which formed a part of the old tower, and it is the bottom of the 3 standing dishes. You see, standing dish is a play on words of Standish, and so they had these 3 standing dishes. That's the bottom half, so you could just get the 1 standing dish. The next one along is a saltire, which was the previous coat of arms of the Standish family. The 3 standing dishes is new. It only dates from 1490. And the previous one was also part of the original tower. And the 3rd black stone along is the bottom half of a gargoyle. And they all came out of that. We're outside of the porch here, and you can see the Bible over the door, a little verse from Ecclesiastes, and the sundial. The sundial is a replacement. It's only new, 1850. Before that, there was a larger one in brass and wood. The dial is very accurate. It's exactly 3 o'clock, which is exactly the time now. Then you look above. There's an upper room. What's that for? Well, it was originally, and it was in the old church as well, going back to the 1300s, it would have been curate's lodgings. And then it became a schoolroom. And you had access from the minstrel's gallery until 1867, when that was taken down. Now, the only access is by ladder, and it's used as a storeroom. Now, the porch is an integral part of the church. For instance, for the 2 services of baptism and marriage, the first part would take place here, and the parish clerk would fill in the registers and the certificates before we go into the main nave of the church for the second part of the service. It's also a place where the service of churching of women would take place. That is, women after childbirth undergo this service, if they would like to, and then go into church after that. And that is still available for people who wish. Now, the parish clerk would have, in this small OG-shaped recess, would keep his pen and ink. And there would also probably be a candle there, and then afterwards a statuette, and that would be kept in the OG-shaped recess there. Now, over here, we have the window that was donated by Maxwell Peace. He was the town clerk of Wigan in 1880, and it is very appropriate. It's Psalm 100, enter into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. And so we are now entering the church. Now, the stone seats that you can see round were actually round the whole of the nave of the church at one time, and all churches, before there were furnishings. The church had rushes on the floor and stone seats round the side, and the people who were disabled or infirm or old were encouraged to go to the wall and sit on the stone seats. This is where the saying comes from, and the weakest shall go to the wall. It arises from the stone seats in churches. Now, I think now we shall go into the church and sit down and go through very quickly the history of the church building. Now, I think we can have a quick run through the history of the buildings on this site. My memory of this church doesn't go back any further than the year 1205, although I rather think that the church was still here in the very late 1100s. But we know that in 1205 there's a document, it's now in the archives of Preston, and it records the dispute between the manor of Standish and the manor of Langtree. Now, you know this village is called Standish with Langtree. Well, at that point, it would have been more realistic to call it Standish against Langtree, because the argument was about the advowson, and that is the patronage, the right to nominate the next rector. And it was the argument between the Lord of the Manor of Standish and of Langtree. And we know who won, because in 1206, the rector nominated was Alexander de Standish. They always tended to appoint from their own families. Yeah. And he was probably the son of the previous rector. Though that's, I think, a conjecture. But you look at this church, and it is big, and the two previous churches before the building in the 1580s they were as big as this, apart from 1 yard on the right-hand side. And then you wonder, why should the Standish Church be as big as this? What would you think about the inhabitants of Standish? Where did they live? Oh, Church Street and Cross Street and High Street and the marketplace. That's about all. Maybe a little bit up Preston Road and just a bit along School Lane, and outlying farms and the odd big manor house. Not very many people at all. Well, the answer is Standish Parish comprised 11 townships, 11 villages. There was Standish, and there was Langtree, and there was Worthington, and Duxbury, and Adlington, and Anderton, and Copple, and Shevington, and Charnock Richard, and Heath Charnock, and Welsh Whittle. I got to 11 there, I rather think. And they were all part of Standish Parish, and they all had to come to church here. Lancashire was well known, Lancashire, for having very few parishes. And of course, by very few, you mean very large. But that is what Standish was like until the mid-1800s, until the mid-Victorian era, when some of these villages built their own churches. Copple and Adlington and Shevington and Charnock Richard, they became the daughter parishes of this mother parish. And the rector of Standish became the patron of these daughter parishes. You notice that we have a rector. They have vicars. What does vicar mean? A deputy, a stand-in, basically. But their parishes have been established in the 1800s. Now, notice that on this site, there has been the worship of God for over 800 years. And each generation has passed the care of it down to the next generation, right down to ours. And of course, it is very important that our generation carries on this and passes to the next generations from the point of view of the worship of the God here, the maintenance of the building, and the pastoral care of all the people who live here. That's very important, isn't it? We did mention when we were outside that the second building was in great ruin and decay in 1543, and it was. And the rector and wardens had sent a petition to the bishop, that's our bishop, the Bishop of Chester at the time, it was put into effect then, the fact that we were going to have to rebuild it. Robert Shardock from Astley was appointed to supervise this. So he arranged for the accounts, looked after the accounts. The big landowners roundabout, the Standishes, the Worthingtons, the Chisnells, and various other people put a lot of money into it, and most particularly the Earl of Derby. Derby, as we know, as in West Derby, just outside Liverpool. And he did a lot in those years to put money into the rebuilding. The Earl of Derby was the biggest landowner in Lancashire. He owned completely the whole village of Coppell, for instance. Oh, or his reward. His reward, if you can see between the two arcades on the spandrel there, there's the crest on the top of his coat of arms, which is the eagle and child. And there it is in stone to commemorate his support. Mind you, everybody in all these 11 parishes were levied. They had to pay towards it as well, the sums that they could manage. Yes, that's right. Now, he appointed a famous architect called Lawrence Shipway, and he had many buildings through the whole country. And he made a very good job of the building. You can see it's late Gothic, English perpendicular, but we think he must have gone around the continent, all over France and particularly Italy, because he brought back this new idea, and that's the Tuscan columns. You can see what they are. There's a large square plinth, there's a round column, and then there's a square capital. Now, Gothic building would have arches like that with a pattern on them with the ribbing, you see, but that would normally go right down to the floor. But Lawrence Shipway has brought this new idea from the Renaissance in Italy of the Tuscan columns. And they are the very first example of Tuscan columns in England. They begin to come in, drift in the early 1600s into London, but we have the first. And that is one of the two main items that qualify the church as a Grade 1 listed building. The other is the magnificent oak ceiling. You can see it's very ornate. Each boss, each intersection has a different carving. And you can see on the chancel beam there, you've got the coats of arms of all the landowners who have contributed to it. And it is beautifully proportioned, and it is a particular glory of this church. Say people who come in, such as Simon Jenkins and Lawrence Pevner, people who are architect experts. And they come in to say that. That's the famous oak ceiling. It goes with the church. in the 1580s, exactly as it was built, this new church. The oak has come from Heart Hill, which is just over there in Heath Charnock. There was a time, I remember, I think it was in the 1990s, when we had a boring beetle, a death watch beetle, at the end of some of the major beams. We knew that because you got little bits of chewed wood dropping on you as you walked about. And we got the architect in, and he said, oh, it's a Grade 1 listed building. English Heritage will want to know about this. However, you can, in fact, put some more wood in its place, as long as you go back to Heart Hill and get the right oak from the same place. And so it has been maintained, if you like, ever since the 1580s, like that. You get the initials of the carpenters and the crests of the donors and so on all over them, yes. So there we are, rebuilding this church from 1582 to 1589. We say 1584 because we can spot stones with that date in them, you see. Right, now, the fabric, the stonework, which is millstone grit from the near Pennines, has not changed. Since then, nothing has altered in the stonework. The windows, of course, which originally were plain, have been replaced with stained glass as memorials to various people around them. And the furniture, none, to start off with. Rushes on the floor, and you stood up for the whole of the service. And then we got some box pews. You know what box pews are? There's a gate with the sidesman comes along and lets the family in. There's a brass plate with the family's name on. And there's a pew rent to pay to maintain your ownership of the box pew. There were one or two where the brass plate said for the poor, and they could go in there and not have to pay anything. Yeah. That's all. So we had that furniture, and then that was early 1700s, and at the same time we had the Singers' Gallery put up. Now, if you can see the holes that have been filled in on those two pillars, that is where the Singers' Gallery was supported. And it went all the way across and all the way to the door you can see, which was the way in which people got into the room above the porch. And of course we had the minstrels for the music and the choir, which was probably the school children. And then we've still got all these 11 townships to keep coming. And they're growing. The number of inhabitants got really large. And so we had to have a gallery. Along the north side, there was a wooden gallery all the length of the North Aisle. You can see again, you see, the holes in the columns that have since been filled in, where you had the supports of the wooden gallery. And that was in 1812. And then later on, through the mid-1800s, the congregation grew. And then when the population was growing even more, a gallery was planned for the south side as well, for the South Aisle. But then what happens? The daughter parishes are being established. And in the mid-1800s, Standish loses a lot of its congregation because they go to their own parishes in the other villages. And so what happened then was they decided to take down the gallery on the north side, not put up any other galleries, and all the galleries were removed. And at the same time, they removed the box pews and put this brand new pew system in 1867. Then the furnishing that we see now is as in 1867. What about heating? There was none at all until 1817, when Rector Perrin decided that there ought to be a stove in church. And so he arranged for a stove to be brought and to be located where you might think, that is, just by the rector's stall. And then later on, of course, we had this present heating system, originally using coal, then oil, and now it's gas. What about lighting? If you can see the third beam, take the chancel beam as the first, and then the second beam. In the middle of the third beam, there's a hook. And that was used to support a huge chandelier that came right down with innumerable candles on it to about 10 feet or so above the floor. And that was put up in the late 1700s. There's a photograph taken in the 1860s, and the photography was going then, of it. And you can see just how big it is in that. I've not got one, but it has been seen. And there were probably smaller chandeliers in the side aisles as well. And then in 1930, we got electric lighting. There's the magazine that I've got from 1930, which is very, very jubilant about the fact that we are installing this brand new technology of electricity. Well, we had electric trams coming into Standish just after 1900, so I don't know why they were so thrilled about that, however. But then electricity. And then this new system dates back to 2015, and is a very good system indeed. So that's the story of the whole building over 800 years. And I think we'll now go and start the tour of the church, going to the font. Now, this is the font in its right place at the entrance to the church to welcome new people into the congregation. The bowl is the same age as the church, that is the 1580s. But the stem to hold it up dates from the previous church, and that goes back to the mid-1300s. The base had to be renewed in the 1700s, and then the cover at the top, of course, is 19th century. The mosaic behind is there to commemorate the 50 years of Rector Hutton's service here from 1886, and that was put up in 1936, and then he had 2 more years before he died. 52 years is a good service to the church. The window above is the Darlington family window. They were from Coppell. They instituted, or helped to institute, the old parish in Coppell in the 1800s, and then in 1911 the new church of St John's in Coppell. That's the Darlington family. Now this is the biggest memorial in the church in memory of Richard Watt, who was born in 1724 and died in 1796. He was a poor boy. We were very poor, and he lived in Shevington, which at that time, of course, was part of Standish Parish. And he was given a job by Geoffrey Worley, a local grocer, as an errand boy, and Geoffrey Worley looked after his family as well. And then he got him another job in Liverpool. as a carriage driver for a family of means. You can call him the first taxi driver, if you like. And he was then given a job from there on the docks as a sailmaker. And part of his job as a sailmaker was to go on the boats and look after the sails on the voyage. And he finished up in Jamaica. And there he stayed and made a huge fortune. And when he came back to Liverpool in 1770, he bought that house, Oak Hill, which is in, was in Old Swan. I don't think it's there now. But what he did as well was to buy Speke Hall. And when he died in 1796, he handed it down to his nephew, who was also called Richard Watt. And all the next generations were Richard Watt, Richard Watt, Richard Watt, right down to the last one, who was Adelaide. And she died in 1926 without any heirs. So Speke Hall then passed to Liverpool Corporation, and it is now National Trust. You could see the sculpture, the little picture. That is the sea. That is the Liverpool waterfront, but in 1806 when that was sculpted. Of course, without the Three Graces, the Cunard Building, and the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board, and so on, that were there only from the 1900s. And the sculpture was by John Bacon, Jr., a famous sculptor who has pieces in Westminster Abbey, for instance. But you have to say John Bacon, Jr., because his father, John Bacon, was even more famous. He established the School of Sculpture in England just before the 1790s. And there was one who came into church when we were doing a previous tour, and he said, I'm John Bacon, where's my sculpture? And so we had to show him. Yes, that's right. Right, so now we move along to the organ. Now we come to the organ. Obviously, previous centuries, there was no music. And then in 1708, a minstrel gallery was constructed. You can see in the pillars there and there that there were the supports for the gallery, which went across, and there were instrumentalists and singers, probably a choir from the schools then. That's 1708. And then 1843, we had our first organ. And that was placed here at the west end of the church, where organs always are, or should be. And that was there till 1913, when we got a new organ, a big organ, donated by Harold Sumner, who was the owner and resident in Ashfield House. And that was placed in where we now have the Duxbury Chapel, in the northeastern corner of the church. And it was a magnificent organ. I well remember this in the 1950s and 60s, a very good organ. But in 1967, there were some visitors. They came along the roof. They took the lead over that part of the church, and then a short while later, there was a storm, and the rain came through what was left of the wood on the ceiling and down into the pipes and ruined it. And so in 1971, we got this new organ and put it back at the West End where the original organ was. And that is a very good organ now. And that while we were doing that, you can imagine the organ that was in the north end there. The choir was in the chancel, and so the altar that you can see now there was right back on the reredos. But when we brought in 1971 the organ back here, we put some choir stalls here as well. The stalls are new, but the elaborate pew ends were the original ones from up in the chancel. And having brought the choir here, it gave us the opportunity to open the chancel so that there's a lot more room for the ministers to move about there. That's the organ. Now, we ought really also to talk about the belfry. There were originally 3 bells in 1552, going back to the old steeple. And then in 1714, we got 4 new ones. Now, you know what happens with bells? There's an inscription going round the bell and for these 4, and one of them had the names of the new church wardens that year, James Blundell and Ralph Lowe. That was 1714. What's happening next year? In 1715, we have the old pretender, James Stewart, who reckons he ought really to be king. Remember, his father has been banished in 1688 because he was a Roman Catholic, and we've now got the Hanoverians, George I, on the throne. But particularly the Scots would like the Stuarts to be re-established on the throne of England. And so an army to support James Stewart is coming down and has got as far as Preston. Now, our patron, Ralph Standish, of Standish Hall, who owns the whole village and is patron of the church. I think we ought to remember this, that the Standish family, who were obviously Roman Catholics before the Reformation, continued in that faith and refused to accept the tenets of the new Church of England. And Ralph Standish in 1715 was a right Jacobite. And he said, right, I'm going to Preston and I'm going to fight with the Jacobite army against the armies of the new crown. And so he did. 3 volunteers, please, you and you, will come with me. These are workers on his land. One of them was James Blundell, the staunch Anglican of church warden whose name was round one of the bells. So off they go. He couldn't obviously resist. He was a worker on the land of Ralph Standish. He was a tanner, actually, a fellmonger. And off they went to Preston to fight for the Jacobites, and they lost. Preston was was as far as that army got. 30 years later, Charles Stuart, born of Prince Charlie, his army got right through here as far as Derby. But they were all captured, and Ralph Standish, being landed gentry, had the privilege of being taken to London and put in Newgate prison, and then tried there. And he was tried for treason and found guilty and sentenced to hang. Now, he had strings to pull. He had married in 1696 the Lady Philippa Howard, the daughter of the Duke of Norfolk, the Earl Marshal of England, the premier non-royal duke, as they still are, the Dukes of Norfolk. I'm still Roman Catholic. And she pulled strings and got him off from being hanged. He had to forfeit all his lands and all his fortune to the crown. This was very sad. How did he symbolise this? Well, you know the owl and the rat that is the crest on the top of the coat of arms of the Standish family? Well, up to then, the rat has always been on its feet underneath the owl. But because of this shame that he suffered, they turned the rat over onto its back. And anywhere in Standish, not just in church, but all over the village, where you see the owl and the rat, if it's before 1715, in sculpture or in stained glass or in painting or anything like that, if it's before 1715, the rat's on its feet. After 1715, it's on its back. 10 years later, Lady Phil, his wife, pulled a few more strings and got all his land back and all his fortunes, and we can carry on as we were from there. But the rat, by the way, has always stayed on his back since then. What about James Blundell? No strings to pull. He was taken to Liverpool Assizes along with 3 other malefactors and accused of treason, found guilty, and brought back to Wigan Lane, just the other side of Mere Oaks, and hanged in February 1716 on the very day that the new bells were first rung to celebrate the great victory at Preston. And that is really showing us the difference between the haves and the have-nots, the landed gentry and the workers on it. Ralph Lowe, the other churchwarden, was actually the parish treasurer. And you can see he's written in the ledger, paid to the bell ringers for celebrating the Preston fight, 5 shillings.
Look to. Treble's going, she's gone.
Now, in the previous church, there were 3 chantries. What's a chantry? It's a chapel, a small chapel, that is established by some family of means, and they furnish it, and they pay a priest to come and say mass for their souls and the souls of their ancestors. There was one here in this corner, and that was the chantry of St Nicholas. And there was another in the northeast corner, the chantry of the Blessed Virgin Mary. That was particularly run by the Rigby family of Duxbury. And there was a third one, which you can imagine, if you can see the top of the screen there, and imagine a floor going right back to the east window. That was the Rood Loft, R-O-O-D, Rood meaning cross. And that was the Rood Loft, and that was the third chantry. But they were all abolished in 1548 in the Reformation. And so we don't get them in this new 1580s church. Now, we ought to look at the hatchments as well. What is a hatchment? It's really, the word is an abbreviation of the word achievement. It's what the family, particularly the lord of the manor, has achieved either in battle or very often in marriage. This is, what are they for? When a prominent person died, the hatchment was put in front of the house. And then when the funeral comes, the funeral procession, the hatchment is carried in front of the procession to church. And then it's laid up in church. Now, can we imagine me carrying one of those? Can you see which is my right hand and which is my left hand? Now, if you look at the first two from the left, the right hand portion has a black background, and that means the lord of the manor has died. If you look at the third one, it is the left hand portion. That is the distaff side, the sinister side. And so that is the wife who has died. And then you look at the fourth one along, and what you see there is both halves of the hatchment have a black background, and that is a widower who has died, wife already having died. And they're all from the early 1800s. That's Sir Robert Clayton, who of Adlington Hall, who died. And it's impaling. By that we mean the other half is his wife. Impaling Baldwin, actually, he married the daughter of Roger Baldwin, who was the rector of Wigan. The second one, can you see the standing dishes? The Standishes, the three standing dishes, that is a play on words of Standish, but that's their coat of arms. And they are quartered, on the left-hand side as you see it now, quartered with the scallops of the Stricklands of Sizer Castle in Westmoreland. And then they're impaling the family of the Gerards in Bryn. Then you have that female Standish there who's died. And then the last one is Edward Townley Standish, who had married Anne Eccleston of Eccleston, but they both died in that, you see. And the Townleys, we shall see their memorial when we are going up on the south side of the church. striding still to truth unknown, soaring, dying round thy throne. Now, these are the two chancel pillars, and they both have staircases to go up to the roof. Our architect, by the way, Lawrence Shipway, was very good. When you get up onto the roof, you don't have to shove a trap door up. He has a proper entrance with a proper door to get onto the roof. He did that very well. Can you see the glass brick? That gives you a little light when you're going up to there. There was a time when the Sunday school used to come for a service and sit on the front pews, and the teacher would say, "Now you lot, you make sure that you behave yourselves. That is the eye of God watching you." Now look at the glass brick again. The 3 or 4 courses of stone just above. What does that remind you of? It seems to seem as if it might be the possibility of a doorway. Now, we're building this church in the 1580s. The rector is Rector Richard Moody. Now, he'd been rector since 1559, and before that, in 1539, he'd been curate here, and he'd been ordained a little bit before that. And he was the rector of this new Anglican church, Church of England, but his beliefs were very Catholic. He was very high church. And you can imagine him, along with the Catholic patron of the church, Edward Standish, talking to the architect and saying, would you leave the possibility of opening a door there? Because in the previous church, there was a door there, which of course provided access to the rood loft that went across from the top of the screen there. And you think about what's going on over there. Philip II of Spain is getting together an armada with the intention of coming in 1588 and conquering England and bringing England back under the authority of the Pope and cancelling altogether the Church of England. And Richard Moody, you feel, would be in favour of that. So he's left open the possibility of a door. However, here we are with hindsight. We know that the Armada failed. That Francis Drake left his game of gold balls on Plymouth Hoe and went and scattered the Spanish fleet altogether. And so Richard Moody hadn't got the opportunity of doing that. He died, by the way, in 1586. And the next rector was the exact opposite. He was a Protestant. He was a Puritan. He was actually criticised by the bishop for not wearing vestments. And he introduced, he was particular about the importance in the service of the sermon, which hadn't been all that important up to then. And he preached loud and long, and the congregation were very appreciative of this. There were some people in the congregation who would say to him, "Look, Rector, I really do enjoy your sermons. When it comes to my funeral, I hope you will preach a jolly good sermon. If you do that, I'm going to leave you a bequest to you personally in my will." And so they did, and he preached a very good sermon, and they were never disappointed. And he was very well known for his sermons. He actually was the tutor to the Prince of Wales at the time, and the chaplain to the Earl of Derby. The Earl of Derby, by the way, had put a lot of money into this rebuilding of this church. Can you see his reward? His crest on the top of his coat of arms is on the spandrel there between the two arches, and it's the eagle and child that you can see. And of course there are eagle and child pubs all round Lancashire. That's because of the Earl of Derby's work. He owned most of Lancashire. Now, Edward Lee was here. He's the longest serving rector, even beating Rector Hutton, 53 years. Came in 1596, we just said, and died in 1639. In 1616, this really symbolises his emphasis on preaching. He gave to the church this pulpit, which is beautifully carved oak, this is his gift to the church and his memorial. And if you read it round, you can see it says, "Mihi incumbit, wa mihi si non evangelizan." In other words, it is laid upon me, woe be unto me if I preach not the gospel. And he did. And then it says, ex sumptibus, out of his own wealth, W. Lee, rector, 1616. That's when he donated it. A beautiful piece of carving. It's moved about. Occasionally it was over there, and once it was halfway down the aisle, because Sir Frank Hall Standish, who is the Lord of the Manor of Duxbury, the chief of the Standish of Duxbury, wanted it next to where he sat, next to his pew. And then it was moved back to there. And then when we had the complete refurbishment of all the pews and so on in 1870, they moved it back here to where it was. And as they moved it, some of the paint chipped off on the whitewash and so on, and they chipped a bit more paint off, and they found that it was this beautiful oak pulpit that had been covered up for 200 years, which was a real shame. But there it is, it's very nice. And on the other side, there's the coat of arms of the Standish family. We're at 1616 there. The screen here was a memorial of Rector Brandreth. And you can see the shields all the way around in the sanctuary as well. They're the shields of the major families who have put a lot of money into this rebuilding of this church. Now, the one on the left there, that's the Langtry family. You know that this village is called Standish with Langtry, two separate villages really, and they lived in Langtry Hall until the mid-1600s, basically, but that is their shield. Now, these two next, the second and the third from the left, are the arms of the family of Standish. The red saltire was the original old one, and then the standing dishes, the third one along, is new. It only dates back to 1490. And then the one next to it, the next standing dish is the arms of the family of the Standishes of Duxbury. And you can just about see that above the Standishes of Standish, there's the owl and the rat, or as a crest. Above the Standishes of Duxbury, there's a cockerel argent, a silver cockerel there. What we can't see now, though we probably did when they were put up, is that the Standishes of Standish has a black background, and the Standishes of Duxbury has a blue background, but that's not all that evident now. Now, the three on the right, the Standish, the Berg and the Rigby, are all families in Duxbury, which is part, or always was, part of Standish parish. And now, I wonder if we could, though the lectern and the rector's stall were both 1847, and again, they were gifts of Canon Brandreth, who was rector here for 46 years. You can see the lectern always in the form of a golden eagle, because the eagle was the symbol of St John the Evangelist, gospel writer. The Clayton Memorial, which you can see there, was to commemorate Thomas Clayton, and he owned Adlington Hall, and also he was a kinsman of the Worthingtons and owned Worthington Hall as well. And just above there, there's one of the stones saying 1584. And EWT, that's Edward and his son Thomas Worthington, who are really part of the Clayton family. Now, we come to the Chisnell cartouche. That's a memorial tablet in the form of a scroll, and it commemorates Edward Chisnell of Chisnell, that's in Copple, who was a royalist, and this is really about an incident in the Civil War, where you can see his coat of arms, the three daggers, and the crest, which is the griffin. Now, this was the siege of Latham House. Now, Latham House was the seat of the Earl of Derby, James, in Latham, which is just this side of Ormskirk. The Earl was fighting for Charles I and was away at the time, and he had left his wife, Charlotte, a French countess, Charlotte de la Trémouille, in charge. Now, she had three helpers with this siege. That is Chisnell of Copple, and also Ratcliffe of Smithills, that's in Bolton, and Molyneux of Sefton and Croxteth in Liverpool. They were all helping her, but the parliamentarians had a huge cannon, a mortar, called Long Tom, and it had a circumference of 13 inches, and it was pounding away at the hall from the outside perimeter walls. And of 5 turrets, 2 it had got already. Chisnell had this good idea. He said, I'll tunnel under the perimeter wall and go and snatch this this cannon. I'll take my men with him. And men probably were Wigan miners, you know. And so they tunnelled underneath the wall, and they got the mortar, and they dragged it into the precincts of the hall, where at that point there it couldn't do any more harm. Yes, and you can see where it says that, can't you? You get to the 5th line, it says, in obsidione leathermensi, in the siege of Latham, he abbripuit, he snatched away from the rebels, he bravely snatched away this fire-breathing mortar, mortarium ignivorum. Now, he's also famous, by the way, for being an author. And the next line after that, Historia quam scripsit Catholica, and he wrote the story of the Ecclesiam Anglicanum, of the English Church, which is truly Catholic. Then further down, obviate, he died in 1653, and his age was 35. It's a very nice scroll. Can you see the cherub on the left? And you can see the symbols. He was a historian. He wrote books. So just above that cherub, there's a quill pen and some books. He was also a general, and so you've got the musket and the pike and the javelin and the pistol going round the top. And then coming down again, you've some more books to show the two sides of his work. Right, now, if we go round the corner, we've got a little bit more of Edward Chisnell just before he dies in 1653. Now, to continue about Edward Chisnell, the royalist, he was given a warrant by Charles. Can we remember that Charles I had his head chopped off in 1649? He was beheaded by the parliamentarians. Now, his son, Charles, reckoned he was the next king, although, in fact, it's going to be Oliver Cromwell who runs the country for the next 10, 11 years. But he thought he ought to be the king. And so he asks Edward Chisnell to get a regiment of horse, a cavalry regiment, to help him, and he will be the general, the commander of horse. Now, that is a replica of the actual mandate that was given to Edward Chisnell. You can see it says on the top, Charles Rex, Charles the King, by the grace of God, King of England, Scotland, France and Ireland. They fancied themselves. But he is giving Edward Chisnell the responsibility to form a regiment and to come and fight for him against the parliamentarians at the Battle of Worcester in 1651. So he did, and they fought, and they lost. And what did Charles have to do then? He had to escape, and he hid in an oak tree. And the parliamentarians were looking round all over for him. They couldn't find him, and they all went back home for their tea. And then Charles could escape. He went to a little manor house called Boscobel nearby beforehand, and then he escaped to France in disguise, dressed as a woman, and was there in France until the Cromwell era finished in 1660, and then he came back and really did become King Charles II. So that's the mandate for Edward Chisnell, and then, of course, as we know, he did die 2 years later in 1653. Now, what's the helmet up there? The helmet is called a sallet. And it's called that because it looked a bit like a salad bowl at the time, and it dates back to the early or mid-1400s. Very possibly worn by Ralph Standish, the Lord of the Manor, at Agincourt in the north of France. The Standishes and the Earls of Derby were always next to the king, or in that case it was the Black Prince, the king's son, and most likely the battles against the Scots, the siege of Berwick in 1485 and so on, 1482. How do we know that it's that age? There was an expert in 1949 who came and saw it and said he thought he knew what it was, but there's going to be an exhibition in London where all the experts from the continent are coming to look at anything that is of great value in England. This chap, Dr. Blair, who was an expert from Manchester University, asked could he take it there? And the rector and warden said yes. So he took it to this exhibition in London, and they did verify that it was actually of Italian manufacture. It dates from the time when the English were not very good at making that sort of thing. So it's bespoke for the Earl of the Manor of Standish, and it's a sallet made in the 15th century, in the 1400s. All right, so he's verified that. There he is in London, and he brings it back. He gets on the train at Euston and comes to Wigan and gets off the North Western Station and gets on the bus to come back to Standish. You know what a bus is like in 1949? It's an open platform at the back with a staircase going up at the back, and underneath the staircase you put your luggage. And then you go upstairs and you admire the view from Wigan to Standish. And then you get off and it's gone. Vanished. 2 days later, there's a Standish man who is working at the sidings at Springs Branch, and in the undergrowth along the railway there by the fence, he finds this and brings it back. Whoever had stolen it thought it's only an old helmet and slung it. But at any rate, we got it back, and there it is on the wall, high enough up. Now, and that's the Standish sallet. There are only 12 still in existence in England, and that is certainly one of them. Now, this is the Townley Memorial. And it tells you the whole tale of the Townleys, you see. Remember Ralph Standish, the Jacobite, in 1715, who married Lady Philippa Howard? Well, they had plenty of sons, and they all died before he did. And so his heir was Cecilia. And Cecilia went off and married the Townley, into the Townley family, that is a big house in Burnley. And there she is marrying. And her son was Edward Townley, who called himself Edward Townley Standish. Then he dropped the Townley and called himself Edward Standish, and they came back here and they ran the manor, and they did very well. They were very good stewards, both of them, Cecilia and then the son Edward. But she died in 1778 and he died in 1807, and they'd no male heir. They had a daughter also called Cecilia, and this second Cecilia went off to Sizer Castle and married into the Stricklands of Sizer, the castle there. So there you are. You can see it's it says Cecilia Townley, the heir of Ralph Radulphi Standish, and then he was then William Townley, and so on, who was buried in Weston, which is near Bath. There we are. And Edward Townley Standish. Now, the Stricklands had a son called Thomas Strickland Standish, and he dropped the Strickland and came back. And so what we've got really is two breakages in the male line of the Standishes, but then it starts again, as if it hadn't been broken at all. But that's the story of the two Cecilias and their sons. Now, we now go into the Standish Chapel, yes. Now, here we are in Standish Chapel, so called because it was the property of the Standish family. Going back to the 1580s, the rebuilding of this church, you remember we said that the Standish family remained Roman Catholic, even though they were very pleased to put a lot of money into this building, the best building in their village. But when they came to church, they wanted their own chapel, and Edward Standish, who was the patron at the time, made sure that this belonged just to them. He was the patron from 1551 right through to 1610. And you can see that the pew ends with Ralph Standish, they were put in a bit later in 1616, have the owl and the rat there as well. The rat obviously on its feet as it's before 1715. This is a private chapel. They have their own key to it and they have their own door. The point about that, of course, is the Roman Catholics, so they can't come in the main door. But they had their key to that, and this was their private chapel. Oh, there was a meeting about just over a century later. In 1726, there is an annual general meeting always of the parish, and it's called the vestry meeting because it goes on in the vestry. Now, the vestry at the time, before we built the new ones in 1913, was over in the Duxbury Chapel on the far north side of the church. And some reason in 1726, they couldn't use that. It was probably even refurbished. So they had the meeting here. The Standishes got wind of it, and they came in and they said, "Oh, no, you don't. This is our private chapel. You will keep out of this." And they had to. And people had to keep out of it until 1901, where you can see that the rights of the chapel were made over to the rector of Church Walms, and it became part of Standish Church. But up to then, it wasn't. Henry Isles Witherington Standish was the very last Standish. He died, and the whole line died in 1920. The last three Standishes, in terms of generations, actually went over to France and married into the landed gentry there. The hall was tenanted. No Isles there, of course, is his mother's maiden name. Now, this chappie, in the very top light of the east window, is getting married. Henry Standish is marrying again into the French nobility. The Count of Cars, C-A-R-S, it's somewhere a small town near Bordeaux, is marrying her. And you can see, if you take the right-hand part of the shield as you carry it, that's the three standing dishes, and the left-hand part is the coat of arms of the Count of Cars. And you see the owl and the rat, and the rat's on its back, because it's after 1715. And there's the motto. You can read the motto round, can't you? Je désire, fais ce que doit, advienne que pourra. What I want is to do what I ought to, come what may. do your duty, whatever happens. Very good motto. And it's in Norman French, because they were essentially Normans originally. Of course, Norman French was the proper language of this country until about the 1380s. And then it was handed over to the rector and wards in 1901. By the way, all the Standishes are buried in the vaults under the Standish Chapel and under the South Aisle, all the way down there. Used to be able to go down at one point, just on the churchyard path, just outside there, you can see a lintel at the top of a doorway about that height. And there must have been stairs down, but in 1930 there was a huge flood. The church wardens went down to have a look at it. It was really flooded. The Standishes were all right, including Lady Philippa Howard, daughter of the Duke of Norfolk. They were floating about in their lead-lined coffins and so on. But it was decided that it would be blocked up from now on. So you can't go down there now. Right. Now, you can see that the ceiling is much more ornate than the rest of the church, because they wanted to beautify it. And the same with the corbels holding the beams up. They're much more decorative than the rest of the church, and they really did make a good job of their own chapel. Something about the windows. The east window there is the Last Supper. Christ and his 12 apostles, one of them in black, slinking off to the right, Judas Iscariot, about to go on to his dirty work, you see. It is, in fact, a memorial and put up by the family of the Ormonds. Now, the Ormonds were the brewers in Standish. You know, the traffic lights are now. There was the Wheatsheaf Hotel and the brewery just behind it, and they lived at the country seat just at the top of School Lane in the Beeches. And that's dedicated to the Ormond family. That window is the first miracle of Christ at the marriage in Cana. And you see where he's changing the water into wine and so on. This window has nothing whatsoever religious about it. It was put up by public subscription. Everybody wanted it in 1934. It's in memory of Marion Gertrude Millicent Hutton, who was the rector's sister. And it portrays an incident in 1381 to do with the peasants' revolt. The peasants were revolting against the barons, and particularly against the poll tax. That's the origin of the poll tax at the time. And Wat Tyler was the leader. He was in Kent and coming with his band of people who wanted these changes, and he got an arrangement to have a negotiation with the king in Smithfield, which was at the time a little village just outside London. And the king, by the way, Richard II, is only 14 years old, so he has to have protection. And you've got the squires around him, and you've got the mayor of London, William Walworth, the chap with the mace. And so they're going to negotiate. Wat Tyler walks across towards the king, and they were a bit suspicious about his body language. And just in case there was going to be any funny business, William Walworth, the mayor, gets his mace and clunks him good and hard, and there's Wat Tyler on the floor, quite wounded. Now, one of the squires of the king, Ralph Standish, who's protecting the king, is there in the second light. He's going to get his sword and go and run Wat Tyler through while he's lying on the floor and shortly after, a few hours after he actually died. Now, for this brave deed, Ralph Standish is rewarded. He's knighted and he's given Scarborough Castle to be the custodian of it. He'd only a year to enjoy this. He died in 1382. But the Standishes are always next to the king, and they're always with the Derbys, you see. Now, that particular Ralph Standish, for instance, this is 1381 here. Go back to 1346, he was at the Battle of Crécy in France, trying to defend Aquitaine, which was English at the time. And then in 1356, at the Battle of Poitiers. So he really did get around. He there was defending the Black Prince. But they did always protect the king, and they were always they had that privilege. Now, I think we can move in now to the chancel and have a look at these two tombs. Now, I think we should look at these two tombs in the chancel. The one on the south side is Sir Edward Wrightington of Wrightington Hall, which is now a hospital, but he died in 1658, and he was the ruler of the northern regions. His tomb was made by his grandson, Hugo Dickinson. Hugo Dickinson, in 1688, which is the end of the Stuart period, went with James II, who was banished, to France, along with Hugo Dickinson's two sons. They went with James II to France, and one of his two sons became a Roman Catholic bishop and came back. He was consecrated as the Bishop of Mala, which is rather a token title, but he actually came here to this area of Lancashire to look after his flock. Very quietly, of course. It was quite illegal. But he lived in Appley Bridge. Then when he died, he's buried here. We have a Roman Catholic bishop buried just under here because he's family. You know, the Dickinsons were related to the Wrightingtons and to the Standishes. And so, well, you can read it, you see. Hink Yuxta Yakit. Here, near here, lies Edward Dickinson of Finch Mill, Appley Bridge. He died there in 1774. Then we're going to Richard Moody. Now, Richard Moody was the rector we were talking about at the time of the rebuilding of this church, if you remember, and he was very Anglo-Catholic. He was a very, very high church. We remember that. Now, this is his tomb, or his effigy. He died in 1586. What's peculiar about it? Here we have a Church of England rector dressed like a monk of 200 years earlier. There's his vestments, there's his tonsure, and we wonder why. There are two solutions have been offered, and one is that while he was alive, he requested to have been remembered like that. And the other solution, which was quite common at the time, is it's actually recycled from an actual tomb of 200 years before. But he did very well, by the way, during the rebuilding. It's all round here. It's all in Latin, but what it says is, here lies Rector Moody, who for 28 years was a very caring pastor for Standish Church. And he provided food for the draftsmen and the masons who built. And then you get to these words here, Edificio Templi bis ruinati, who were building this temple already twice ruined. And that's how we know there were two churches previously on this site. And that's Rector Moody, and that's when he died. Now, if you look below the south window, can you see two recesses? The one right over to the east with the ogee shape, that's a piscina, where the holy water was poured out to go into the consecrated ground of the churchyard to keep it away from the devil, who would actually pick it up and play with it, or indeed witches. And of course, in those days, there were plenty of witches about, and not only in Pendle. Now, that is part, by the way, of the original building. It's sandstone, it's not millstone grit, and the next opening is the aumbry, where the consecrated elements of bread and wine will be put in there and stored after a service in order to be taken out to people who couldn't come to church. It used to have wooden doors on when it was used. We have now a new aumbry in the Standish Chapel. Yes, and the altar, remember we said that there used to be the organ here, and here were the choir stalls, and the altar was right there on next to the reredos. When we moved the organ back to the West End, then we've been able to open this, and there's much more room for people to move around. The top, by the way, of the altar, it is the altar from there to there, and it was originally marble, but now it has been more or less replaced by an oak altar, but quite a few bits of the original marble have been actually inserted into it. So we reckon it's just a continuation, you see. All right. Now, imagine the rector, before we moved the altar, particularly just after the church was built, standing there taking communion. And you look up, right up to the intersection of the beams, and the first one coming out of the eastern side and out of the southern side, all these intersections are carved differently, but that one particularly has a grinning face and its tongue sticking out. And it's right over where the rector is. And you imagine it's somebody's joke or a bit of revenge or something like that. That's where that is, yes. The reredos with the four archangels of Gabriel and Uriel and Michael and Raphael, that was given by it's a memorial to Canon Brandreth, who died in 1885 from his widow. And now, two other things. If we come to the memorial to Rector Perrin, that's there. He was a very good pastor. For instance, he took all the produce of his rectory, of his garden, round to the people of the parish. And what he did as well was to take notes, to fill notebooks, to have a huge diary of the whole workings of the parish. And he was called the Recording Angel. And his symbol is the pineapple, right on the top. And there's another pineapple for him halfway down the aisle as well. And that's Richard Perrin. The other thing to say here is about Maud. Now, you can see the tomb lid there. We think that was originally on the floor, because a lot of the tombs are, you see. You know, if you had any money, you were buried inside the church. If not, you were out in the churchyard. But that's Maud Chisnell, and it's early 1300s, and you can read it round. It says, La femme de Roberto Chesenal, Chesenal, and there's a picture of her as well. Of course, again, you see, early 1300s, it's in Norman French. Now, this is the east window. It's new. We had a good east window before, which was put in by a glazier from the town of Metz, M-E-T-Z, in eastern France. But in the early 1960s, the lead was really getting quite done. And so we decided to have a new one. And this new one, put in by J. Stammers, a very famous glazier from York, it was put in with the legacy of the headmistress of the girls' school, Miss Margaret Foy. She was headmistress from 1947 to 1961, and she died in 1964, and this is her legacy and her memorial. Now, you can see what it is. At the bottom, the colours are predominantly blue. That is Christ's life on earth, his birth and his life and his crucifixion. And then above, you've got Christ in glory and the heavenly host. And you've got the colours of basically red and gold. And the hand of God right up at the top there. Yes, right. Now then, a couple of things about the corners. In the bottom left-hand corner, you've got Northern Saints. You've got St Hilda of Whitby, who was in the 400s, basically. And you've got St Wilfrid of Ripon, that's our patron saint, and you've got St Chad of Lichfield. We think Lichfield is in the north. I know it's in Staffordshire, but we were in the Diocese of Lichfield at one point, so that's all right. Now, in the other corner, who have you got there? Who is the man holding the medical textbook and with herbs in his hand? He's Thomas Lineker, who was the founder of the Royal College of Physicians, the first man really in England to organise doctors. And he was born in 1460, died in 1524. In Henry VIII's early part of his reign, 1510 and round then, he was the chief physician at the court of Henry VIII. And then in 1520, he took holy orders, became a priest, and became rector of Wigan, which is why we consider he's local, even though he was born in Canterbury. And what we have in Wigan now, of course, is the outpatients department, the Thomas Lineker Centre. And who's the fellow in a brown soldier's uniform holding a replica sailing ship. That's Majed Standish. Now, Majed Standish was the captain of the guard, not the captain of the ship, that was a chap called Jones, the captain of the guard on the Mayflower as it sailed in 1620. He was there to look after the pilgrims. There was a crew, but there were the pilgrims on the boat as well. They had basically, a lot of them, come from Holland, from Leiden, where they'd been banished to because they were Presbyterians, protesters. And they'd come from there to Leiden to Lincolnshire, Boston. Then basically they gathered them, and they had really started from Boston, but they got on in the boat at Plymouth in Devon, and they finished at Plymouth Sound in Massachusetts, as it became. And he was the captain of the guard and the captain of the guard when they started their settlement in Massachusetts as well. And the Wampanoag tribe were there. There was a little bit of hostility for about a year, and then after that they certainly made friends and learnt from one another, like learning how to grow maize and that sort of thing. Yes, Majed Standish looked after everybody, and then he went a little bit further in, away from the shoreline, and founded a town which he called Duxbury. He's there, and he's buried there, and there's a big column with his effigy right on top in Duxbury. He called it Duxbury because he reckoned he came from Duxbury. Now, there are two theories about this, about his origins. One is that he came from the family, the Standishes of Duxbury. So he's called that by his from his heritage. But actually, there is some research that says he was really a member of the family of the Standishes of Ormskirk. And 100 years before that, those Standishes went to live in the Isle of Man. He is descended from them and came from the Isle of Man. And there's a little village called Ellenbane, which is on the road across the north of the Isle of Man from Peel to Ramsey. And there is the house which they say is where he was born, and it's a shrine to Majed Standish. And they've written a nice little book about his life called Majed Standish, the first Manx American. Now, you can take your choice as to whether he was Manx or whether he was Chorley or Duxbury. But that is certainly Majed Standish. But he did a very good job. He was a well-known soldier. He was commissioned when he was 21, I think. So that was basically because he was well-connected, I rather think. So that's Majed Standish. Now, here we are in the Duxbury Chapel. It's private, like the Standish Chapel, but it was handed over in 1814. The line died out, and the chapel became part of the church then in 1814. Although it was used, they weren't as insistent as the Standishes were about that. Yes, the windows, by the way, here are all very late, very late 20th century, and then two 21st centuries. The windows in the Standish Chapel are all 20th century, and the windows around the nave are all 19th century, you see. You've got to imagine this chapel without the wood furnishings in the middle. It was as big as the fabric suggests, rather than the furnishing. Yeah. There's the list of rectors, going back to Alexander de Standish. A lot of them are Standishes. They appointed people from their own parish and so on, yes. That's got down to, we have 3 more missing. That only goes down to 1981. But the big one, the big 2 or 3 were of over 50 years. There's one, by the way, that we ought to mention, and that's Ralph Brydoak in the 1600s. Ralph Brydoak was instituted in 1645 before the Civil War finished, and he was a royalist. And so when Cromwell took over, he was banished, and a placeman was put instead of him called Paul Latham, and he was very well liked, but he lasted as long as Cromwell lasted, and then in 1660 Ralph Brydoak became rector again, was reinstituted, yes, in 1660. He did, by the way, 2 jobs. He was also the Bishop of Chichester, which is a good nearly 300 miles on horseback in 1660. And he ran the 2. Mind you, they got 2 or 3 curates in any case. That was Ralph Brydoak. That's a direct line, uninterrupted, all the way from 1206, and probably before that as well. Right, now, if we go into the other... No, sorry, just this. We did talk about the box pews that used to be in the church before we had the new furnishings. And you know what a box pew is? There's a gate before you go into it, and the sidesman comes and opens it for you, and that is your family pew. And you have a brass plate on the gate to show it's yours, and you have pew rent to pay as well for it. There were 1 or 2 that said, for the poor, who could go in without paying. Yeah. Now, when they were taken down, some of the brass plates on the gates were put here, particularly. And people do come in and say, that's my great-granddad. Now, there's one particular one in the bottom left-hand corner which says it's the pew for the mistress and the children of Mary Smalley's school. Now, in 1794, Rector Smalley's niece, Mary Smalley, established a school for girls, unheard of. You know, we'd had a school for boys for over 100 years, but a school for girls, and there she settled it down, yes, nicely, a school for pious learning and useful industry, that is, religion and sewing. There was a free school, girls from 5 to 10, and she dressed them in a nice uniform, and they came to church on a Sunday morning. She had a teacher called Dolly, and Dolly, the teacher, brought them in just before the service started, when all the congregation are in, and the congregation used to turn round and say, oh, here come Dolly's chickens. Because they look like that with the uniform. Now the service can start. Yeah, but that was their pew. Yes, and they sang as a choir as well when they were here. Yeah, that chest, by the way, was very useful. It has 3 locks. It had in the days where it was used. 1 for the rector, the other 2 for the 2 wardens, and it couldn't be opened unless they were both there, all 3 of them. They couldn't otherwise use it just themselves. Yes. Mm-hmm. Now, this Duxbury Chapel was private until 1814 when the Standishes of Duxbury line died out. And it was handed over to the church in the same way as the Standish Chapel was, but that was in 1814. You can see the 3 standing dishes. They are Standishes, but they have a different crest. That's the cockerel, and they have a different motto where it says "Constant en tout," in other words, constant in everything, and faithful in everything. The windows in the Duxbury Chapel, the one we saw over there, was the memorial to past parishioners. Canon Bramley, the rector at the time, in 1980, he dedicated that. And then we have 2 21st century windows here. That one celebrates the millennium. What have you got? On the very right-hand line, you've got the 2 M's. There we are, 2000. And then in the next one, you've got the churches of Standish. There's Standish St Wilfrid where we are, there's Standish St Mary's Church, the Roman Catholic one, and then there's Standish Methodists down at the bottom there, yes. And then in the third light, you've got the Red Rose of Lancashire and the industries here, the mining and the mills. And then right at the bottom, that is Standish Hall, where the Standishes lived. And that was a hall until when the line died out in 1920, and then it was dismantled. Some of it is rumoured to have gone to the United States, but it isn't there now, at any rate. And then you've got the St Wilfrid and the cross, and that's the cross outside the on the market square there, on the marketplace, and there's the owl, you see, and the peace gate that you've got there. Yes. Now the Haydock Memorial. The family of Haydock from Bogburn Hall in Coppell, they provided several rectors, but then in the 1650s or so, they were Quakers, and so they were persecuted. So they went to America, the land of the free, and then at some point in the 1922, one of the family came back and donated that memorial with a list of all the Haydocks that they could list, and particularly the very last one. Now, the very last one says George Guest Haydock, 1894 to 1918. He wasn't very old. He was amongst one of the first Americans in the first American contingent to come over to Europe to fight in the world wars. And he fought in France and lost his life probably at Passchendaele, and he's there. I remember one Sunday evening when I was sidesman of that particular service. This is going back about 30 years. And at the end of the service, there was a gentleman and his wife and his little daughter who came and gave their books in and said, "That's been very good. By the way, we are Haydocks from America. Where's our memorial?" And I had to bring them round and show them that, and they were thrilled to bits to find that. Yes, that's the Robert Haydock. I went to Massachusetts. Yes, okay. Now, just one more item, and that is down in the vestry, a painting that depicts a lot of the history of it. If we can go down there, please. Now, here we have a painting that was made in the 1790s that shows you really what we were talking about when we were standing outside looking at the building. What you have here, from there to there, is the new building of the 1584. That is not what we've got today. That was the old tower and spire that were deemed to be altered and not necessarily taken down. So that dates from the 1300s. What you have here is the vestries that we're standing in. They're not built yet. They're built in 1913. And that, by the way, is where you emerge from the staircase of the chancel arch. You come up to there and there's a door to come out. That is the older sundial made of wood and brass, obviously a lot bigger than the one we've got at the moment. There were the clocks in the old tower as we have now in the old spire. There are three, you've noticed that. There's this one facing Wigan to the south. There's one facing Southport to the west, and on the other side there's one facing Preston to the north. There's none on this side facing east, and that is because nobody lives there. There's no houses down Rectory Lane, although there were a few years ago when I went down and found it's covered in new estates now. But that's why there's no clock there at any rate. This is the original churchyard wall that we've still got, and the gates. We have now got the gates duplicated, one on each side of the gatehouse. Well, those were the old ones. The gatehouse, the Peace Gate, 1926, that's not there, as you can see. Here are all the people walking about as if they were dressed in the 1790s. I didn't notice that row of terraced houses when we came in. That was rumoured to have been built about 10 years after our new church in the 1580s. Well, no, the very early 1600s, by a Roman Catholic who wanted the nice vista of the new church to be completely hidden from the village. Now that's a myth which we can believe if you like, and not if you don't want. But in the 1930, James Martland Ainscoe, who is a big tycoon living in Wrightington, he bought it in order to take it down, and so we have got the vista of the church. And what there is there now is greensward. It's council owned. But that's how the church has been pieced together over the centuries, what there is now and what there used to be, and so on. I remember my confirmation, for instance. Our confirmations were always the second week in February, and at the time there was a huge snowstorm, and all the confirmation candidates came in their wellies. This was before everybody had cars and so on. Yes, I remember just about remember the end of the war. Yes, when there were great celebrations and feasts and so on here. Yes, as well. So yes, I remember it does go back as far as a child's memory can. I started doing it, taking over from other people who had been doing it in 2006. And before the pandemic was here, we used to do one probably every 2 months, and more frequently if people asked. In this way, for instance, the coat of arms on the crest of the Standish family are all over the church and all over the village. For instance, the Boar's Head Inn, just on the boundary of the village, and a lot of other places. And of course, it became the symbol of Standish Urban District Council. It has, more or less, if you like to put it like this, run the village. Yes. Just basically, small changes, for instance, to the heating system and the lighting system, and also to the services. For a long time in my attendance here, it was the Book of Common Prayer from the 1660s. And then they have moved over to common worship, which is distinctly very modern language and so on. Oh yes, we have forays into new estates to encourage people to come, and they do. Some of them, yes. We have in the congregation a lot of young people who we've seen for the last 10 years, but not before that. Oh, very much so. Not only to the regular congregation, who really find it very comforting, but also to the general population of the church. They look upon it not only as the major building in the village, but also as the source of help whenever they need it. Oh, to remain a very important part of the parish, and to keep on introducing the service of God to as many people as really we can, and we hope they do, and to see that it plays its part in the main functions of the village, such as, for instance, groups, societies, and so on. We accommodate in the parish hall, whether they are religious or secular. Oh, absolutely, very much so, yes. Really, I really refer to it in the terms that Caesar used. There are three parts to my life. There's the work, and the family, and the church.